We have a panel of local journalists in our studio today talking about top news stories that matter to you. That's coming up on Nevada Week.
Support for Nevada Week is provided by Senator William H. Hernstat, Cashman Equipment, and additional supporting sponsors.
Well, welcome, and thank you for joining us this week on Nevada Week. Well, August was a busy month for both local and national news. And today, on this special Month in Review edition of Nevada Week, we're going to examine some of the stories that will continue to develop and impact Nevadans in the near future. Now, on this particular show, we're talking about education funding, starting with what we can expect now after CCSD's recent teacher contract agreement. We'll also discuss the latest presidential campaign activity and what candidates are saying about the issues that matter to Nevadans. We'll also talk federal and local immigration policy. And finally, what emerging stories might we see in the coming months? Well, joining our discussion, please welcome Jackie Valley, reporter from the Nevada Independent, Michael Lyle, reporter from the Nevada Current, Amelia Pak-Harvey, reporter from the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and John Sadler, reporter from the Las Vegas Sun. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. I've had the pleasure of reading all of your articles over the last several years, and thank you. I really appreciate it. I mentioned we're going to start with education funding first, and Jackie, I want to start with you. You did a really great job, and Nevada Independent did a really great job of kind of boiling down what this contract dispute at CCSD was all about. If I give you like 30 seconds or a minute, can you give us a summary of what the real pinch points were and why we almost led to strike?
Sure. I've had this question several times. There are a variety of pay raises at stake in the contract negotiation process. And so CCSD's original offer included a 3% essentially cost of living increase for all employees, a 2% step increase, which that's more of a seniority raise based on length of employment, and then a contribution to employee health plans. But it was lacking these so-called column advancements, and those have to do with professional development. So teachers have, or the system has what's called a professional growth system, where teachers are working toward their professional development plans, and that can be a variety of courses, collegiate work, mentoring, tutoring. It kind of runs the gamut, and you accumulate what are called contact units. And so once you reach a certain number of CUs, then you're supposed to get a pay raise. And so the union was upset that the column pay raises were not included in the original offer. And that led to the tension. I mean, I think there was already a lot of tension about education funding, but that ultimately was the trigger point.
And Amelia, this is not something that was discussed in legislation. It wasn't something that was included in the original budget, which kind of led to this being a main discussion point. Was it discussed at all, legislation, or was it addressed in the original budget for the district?
No, and part of the union's contention is that the district never really budgeted for those raises, and then the governor's issue with the district, of course, was that they never brought it up to them during the session that they needed that extra money. Whether or not the legislature would have funded that extra money is, I guess we'll never know. But the omission of that funding is what upset a lot of people, the union and legislators.
Now, in the last week, we've had the Nevada Republican Party that has aired an ad on television saying that Governor Sisolak and Senate Majority Leader Canizaro knew about this, and this was discussed in the months prior to the legislative session ending. Jackie and Amelia, both, have you seen any evidence of that?
I know there was an email circulating that, the CCSD CFO had contacted people in the governor's office, and then Dr. Jared said that, my lobbying team knew that number, but then you have the union saying, no, the district's numbers were always changing. Then the governor chimed in saying the same thing. So I don't know if there's a definitive answer for what that number ever really was, or if it was clearly communicated throughout the session.
Amelia, it looks like regardless of that, the agreement's going to go through. It hasn't been voted on yet, but it looks like it's going to go through. For one thing, where is this extra money coming to cover professional growth?
That's a good question. The district hasn't been specific about what exact money they're getting from each of the three things they kind of highlighted last week in the announcement, but one is interest earnings. I'm not quite sure what that is or what that means. I'm waiting for an answer from them. And they have frozen central office positions, so savings from that. But we're still, hoping to see what exactly, the amount that each of those things would save.
Jackie, let's go back to the raises. Okay, so we have teachers getting raises. Let's go back to kind of some of the central issues that we're having in education, right? I mean, we're talking about read by grade 3 levels. We've got lower levels in graduation rates and things like that. How do the raises that teachers are receiving really impact kind of those indicators?
Well, I think what you saw was the pent-up frustration, and so not every teacher was eligible for this column pay raise because it was only teachers who had completed that professional development work that would be eligible. But when I attended that rally during that very challenging school board meeting the week prior, a lot of the teachers that came out, they weren't even eligible for it. They just said, we're standing here in solidarity with our teachers, and we fear that if this pay raise isn't honored, it's going to have a chilling effect across the system. And we're already dealing with these large class sizes and not enough textbooks or even chairs for our students. So it's insult on top of injury.
Yep. Michael, Nevada Current has covered the shortages that teachers currently have at CCSD. We've got a teacher shortage almost at the level of what we were at in 2015, what we called crisis levels. When we're looking at teacher raises, is that a way that we're going to see greater retention in teachers and potentially use this as a recruiting tool, so we're going to see more teachers coming into the district?
That's a good question. We're seeing a lot of the gaps, teacher shortages are actually in low-income areas. And so I know there has been several complaints about just not being able to retain teachers and not giving the funding to teachers or support to the teachers to stay in those areas. And it's really having a lot of problems. I know that the Clark County was passed the buck as far as how they contend with this. They recently voted to raise the sales tax by 1/8 of a cent, and one of the areas it could go to is actually to help with teacher recruitment and retention, but it's not specifying whether or not that's where the money is going to go to. They still have a lot of conversation before that goes into effect in January, and so we'll see whether Clark County actually takes this on and helps to fund the gaps as far as retention and retainment.
Yeah, and Jackie, let's talk about that. So the County Commission just voted last week to have this 8th sales tax. The legislation that passed in 2019 would have allowed a 4th sales tax, but they went with the 8th. For one thing, do we have an idea of how much money is going to go to education here?
So they were originally projecting that the quarter-cent increase would bring in about $108 million. So now that they chop that in half, we're expecting $54 million, but it's unclear how much of that $54 million would wind up in CCSD's coffers. It wasn't, at the last second, they stripped part of the ordinance that would have said 50% to the school district and 50% to other social services allowed by Assembly Bill 309. And so what they're doing is going toward this, essentially a grant program where the entities will have to apply for grants for funding. So it could shake out about the same, or it could be different.
I'd like to add on that too.
Yep.
Like there's 5 different areas, or I think 5 or 7. I think 7 different areas where they could actually direct money. It could be anything from homelessness and affordable housing to truancy programs and teacher retainment. So there's no guarantee that this money is going, how much of this money is going to go into the school district.
And also, Amelia, when I hear grants, I think of restrictive money. I think of ways that there are ways you can spend money and ways you cannot spend money. So it's not necessarily, I would assume, that the district has kind of carte blanche of how they're going to use this money. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, like Jackie said, there's not any, the commission hasn't been, straightforward with what exactly they would use that money on, so it's still all kind of up in the air. And another key point of contention between the county commission and the district has been this open doors, open schools agreement to let public groups use school land, school properties, school playgrounds, school buildings. That's been an issue for a while, and I don't see any kind of agreement recently between both parties on that. I kind of get the sense that the commission is holding that over the district's head in terms of, we will give you this money if you approve this if you let our public groups and people use your school grounds. So that's been a kind of heated point of debate. And from the district's perspective, I think they're just concerned with having a free-for-all on their public grounds with, if a kid gets hurt or injured or someone, breaks a window or something, who's going to pay for that? If someone sues, who's going to take responsibility? So that's the district's perspective. The commission's perspective is, we pay tax dollars for these lands. Why can't we just use them as we see fit? So
yeah, it sounds very complex, and I'm wondering, Jackie, do we have any idea of like how long it's going to take to solidify kind of how the money's going to be redirected?
Yeah, so they directed county staff to come back in about 30 days with a plan for how this grant application process would work. And then I imagine there'll be the request for applications, but that 8-cent tax increase doesn't even go into effect until January. So the turnover of money probably isn't until April, which that's, so 6 months down the road. And then on top of that, what was passed also included a sunset of June 2021. So this is like less than 2 years potentially that we'd have this tax increase too. So the long-term benefits of it, we'll see.
Yeah. Education funding is one of the areas that we are hearing presidential candidates campaigning for, maybe not as much as some other areas that we are hearing some of the campaigning. John, one of the things we have seen a lot of activity, especially on the Democratic candidate side, is in labor. We've seen a lot of labor union events where we've had a lot of candidates attend. First off, why is that so important in this state, in Nevada, where we have candidates really focusing on the labor aspect?
Well, you have a large, voter bloc that is involved in organized labor here, and it's can be a useful tool to have in your back pocket if you get an endorsement from someone like AFSCME here, who is, or the Culinary Union, who have thousands and thousands of members. So, you can make the argument for why that is. Nevada has one large economic base, which is tourism, which creates all these service jobs. But yeah, it's really, you get these endorsements from like AFSCME, who did sit out the 2018 cycle between Sanders and Clinton in the endorsement, and so they're playing fairly close to the chest who they might endorse in this in the 2020 election, but it's very hotly chased.
Do we have any idea of when those endorsements kind of come through?
Not right now. And on a personal level, I feel like it's not going to be until the field winnows down a bit. I mean, we've still got in the double digits by a long shot, one of the largest fields in memory.
Double digits, and Michael, we have a lot of those double digits are circulating through the state almost on a daily basis. Are you seeing any that are kind of rising to the top, especially just here in our state, that seem to be doing it right? And I know the labor is one area, but getting in early and really kind of connecting with the community seem to be the three things that really kind of build a successful candidate here in our state, at least in the past. Who's doing it really well?
Absolutely. I think we've seen a lot of campaigns learn from past mistakes to actually get in on the ground and realize that Nevada is not Iowa and not New Hampshire and has to have a specific strategy, and so we have to get here on the ground early. That means opening offices in East Las Vegas, in the Latino community, opening offices in West Las Vegas, making sure that you have staff that reflect the community. And we're seeing that from the Warren campaign. We're definitely seeing that from Cory Booker's campaign and Harris's campaign. I think a lot of them are taking needed steps to be inside the communities that are actually could potentially win the state for them. So. And
John, how about polls? We're looking at polls. Who's rising to the top right now?
Well, former Vice President Biden is still sitting at the top, though the numbers have been going down for him in the last polls, but he's still, I think the last one was at 25%. Sanders and Warren are both kind of going back and forth on who might be getting second and third place here. Tom Steyer, interestingly enough, placed fairly high in the last poll, though Senator Kamala Harris has still been, in fourth place. But Steyer's seems like his last-minute ad campaign, this ad blitz that he's been doing, is paying off, at least in the western states.
One of the other news stories in the last week has been that we had a potential virtual caucus that was kind of on the table, something we've planned long-term for. It looks like there's been a kibosh on that. John, first off, what is the difference between a virtual caucus and our traditional form?
So with the virtual caucus, the idea was that you would, well, to put a fine point on it, you would call in from your precinct that you would, caucus in person at, and then you could, you'd get a code, and you could call in during a set time in January, and essentially give the list of candidates that you preferred over the phone, so you wouldn't have to be at these caucus sites, which was a change they made on the direction, a change they attempted to make on the direction of the DNC because past campaigns, especially in Vegas, or past caucuses, especially in Vegas, are kind of hard sometimes for people to get to. It's in the middle of the day. It takes longer than you would say, a primary. You can go in and just cast your ballot. Here, you have to hang out there for a few hours, take part in the whole caucus process, so it can be difficult sometimes. So this was a attempt to make that a bit easier on people.
And eventually, the DNC is the organization that put the kibosh on it. Do we know why?
Well, security issues came up that they weren't entirely sure that this was going to be a safe way to conduct a caucus, and here there was a bit of blame cast by political gamesmanship, it seems, cast by the Democrats here to say that the Republicans weren't doing enough to protect voter security on a national level, which the Republicans fired back that the Democrats should deal with it themselves on this personal Democratic caucus. So it seems like it was a security issue. They didn't think that it could be safe. They didn't think it could be done in a way that could mitigate any kind of concerns about voter fraud.
And speaking of Republicans, we can't forget that we actually do have other candidates running against Donald Trump. As a matter of fact, in the last few weeks, Joe Walsh, a former congressman from Illinois, has joined the race. Bill Weld has been former governor of Massachusetts, has been in the race for several months. We haven't seen any activity here in the state over the next couple months. Michael, are we going to see Republican candidates and Trump himself campaigning here in Nevada?
I definitely would imagine Trump coming back. I mean, he made a lot of visits during 2018. I would imagine that him coming back, for some reason, he thinks Nevada is at play for him. I would disagree. I think a lot of polls would disagree with him. I think a poll looking at Latino support for him just showed a high number of Latinos that have voted for Republicans in the past are very discontent by his policies, by his stances on immigration, of how he treats Latino people. And so I would imagine that Trump would try to make a play for Nevada. I don't think that will go very well. I don't know about some of the other candidates. I'm still curious to see how viable their actual campaigns are. They talk a big game on Twitter and social media, but that's different than actually getting on the campaign trail.
Right. John, how about the Democratic candidates here? What are we going to see over the next couple months? How is campaigning changing then? Or will we kind of see the same thing we've been seeing over the last couple months?
Well, I imagine you'll still see a lot of plays for organized labor support here. And I feel like the events, to be blunt, will get bigger because we're entering the stage of the cycle where these candidates are starting now to qualify for debates. The DNC is starting to crack down. And you've seen like Senator Kirsten Gillibrand has left after not qualifying for these debates. And so I would say, I'd hazard a guess that especially after October, the field's going to winnow down to a point where you're going to see much bigger events, and you might start seeing endorsements rolling out whenever you're in these, it starts getting down below 10 maybe.
I would like to add to that too. I'm really curious to see how their strategy intensifies to target minority voters. Like I mentioned, Nevada is a minority-majority state, which you have to campaign completely differently here than you do in Iowa and New Hampshire, which are predominantly white. And so I'm really curious to see how they roll out specific items towards those community. Healthcare, the economy, those are polling high in the Latino community and the Asian Pacific Island community, which has grown by 167% since 2000. And they want specific answers on campaign proposals about how their policies will impact those communities. And so I'm really curious to see when they do come back into the state, if they're just kind of roll out these blanket statements on their policies, or if they're going to actually make a better play for some of these communities that want specific answers.
And let's talk specifically about immigration. We're talking about campaigning too. Obviously, the Trump administration over the last month, really, there's been a lot of movement in at least proposals for policy changes of kind of bringing more federal control into deportations, and then also the
public charge rule.
Public charge rule. Thank you very much. So, I mean, when we're looking at policies like that, they're proposed, but yet there could be executive orders there. I mean, do you see that the Democratic candidates are going to be campaigning a little bit more on immigration, especially in Nevada?
I think so. However, I think speaking to sources within the Latino community, they want more than we need to stop separating children at the border. They want a lot more than I visited these facilities at the border. They want a lot more. They need a lot more answers and specifics about how we're going to fix our broken immigration system. I mean, we've tried to pass the DREAM Act since 2000, and we've failed as a country. We've tried to take steps forward, and we have not gone anywhere. And so we want specifics. And going back to our rising Asian American Pacific Islander population, their specific questions on immigration differ from Latinos. When Senator Harris is in town at One API Nevada, which is specifically for the Asian American Pacific Islander population, one of the immigration questions was about how when Filipinos come here and they have nursing licenses, the process of getting a nursing license is different, and so how to smooth that out. And so their questions are much different than maybe questions from the Latino community. And so that goes back to having specific answers to whatever policy proposals they roll out.
And when we're talking about the candidates that are right now campaigning in Nevada, I mean, who's doing a good job of answering specific populations' questions about something like immigration?
I mean, that also depends on what group you talk to and what person within the group. That might vary from person to person to group. And so I don't want to make a blanket statement of one candidate is doing the best in one specific demographic.
Looking forward, we've talked a little bit about August. We're now a week into September. Let's talk about September. Let's talk about October. What are some of the big stories that you see kind of emerging in the areas that you're reporting on that you think will kind of be those big stories that'll kind of last more than maybe just a month or two? Jackie, let's start with you.
Well, hopefully we'll get these teacher contracts approved and move beyond that and start talking about student achievement again. I think there'll be more focus on equity and how to maybe open up some of the magnet and CTE schools to more students.
Amelia?
I think we're going to be looking at the safety funding too that the school districts are receiving from the legislature that recently, appropriated all that money. Who's getting what and what they're spending it on. I already know that the school police did not receive funding for the 4 extra canine officers that they were kind of counting on. When they talked about it, it kind of seemed like it was a done deal. Apparently not. So how we're going to roll out those safety features if we get the money that we wanted, if we don't get the money that we wanted. The superintendent already said this week that they did not receive the full funding that they wanted. So how they're going to deal with that, safety is on the mind of everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah. John?
Well, like I said earlier, I'm interested in which candidates are going to start dropping out with these debates coming up, and I'm also interested in there's the lawsuit that was filed by state Republicans and some businesses against Senate Democrats here and the governor in regards to how they passed a 2/3 in regards to how they passed a tax increase without a 2/3 majority. There was a little bit of drama near the end of the session, so that should be working its way through the courts, and we'll see how that goes.
And do we expect that to be in the courts for a long time, or do we think we'll start to get a result here?
That's an interesting question because the Republicans promised essentially immediately that this was going to be going to court, and the Democrats said that the Legislative Counsel Bureau had their back, the legal arm of the legislature had their back here, and essentially said that this was a legal way to do this. And so, I'm not going to say that I'm sure one way or another how long that's going to take.
Yep. And Michael?
At the beginning of October, I know a lot of the candidates are going to be heading back here for March for Our Lives forums, and so leading up to that, I'm curious to see not only which candidates drop by beforehand, but talk about gun control a little bit, especially with the anniversary of the October 1st massacre, to see what proposals they have and if they're going to expand upon some of their already rolled out policies on gun reforms.
As of right now, do we have any specific policies on gun control that are kind of coming through that some of the campaign the candidates are talking about?
I think the main things that we're seeing is a call for comprehensive background checks. We're seeing a call for some candidates talking about eliminating red flag laws or boyfriend laws, boyfriend loopholes that actually give boyfriends and domestic violent situations still have the ability to get weapons. And so some candidates are calling for that. I think only one candidate, Julian Castro, is talking about gun reform and also police accountability and making those connections, which I think is really unique and something that a lot of community activists have been desiring to hear. And then of course, the assault weapons ban, just strengthening that. We have Senator Warren talking about making ways to get funding to the CDC so they actually can study this as a public health problem. And so there's throwing out a lot of different ideas, things that we've heard before. We'll see if they have ways to get that passed, especially if they don't have control of the Senate, assuming one of them actually wins the presidential campaign.
Yeah, not a lot of data in gun control or guns in general.
Not at all.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here. And thank you, as always, for joining our discussion on Nevada Week. Well, please visit our website to watch this episode again or access resources or stories that we've discussed on the show. Also, if you like the format of this Month in Review show or have a topic or issue you'd like us to explore on a future Nevada Week, we'd love to hear from you. So please find us on social media or email us at nevadaweek@vegaspbs.org. Thank you again, and I'll see you on the next Nevada Week.